4 minutes past 10 the time. Good morning to you. Great to have your company. Tom Swarbrick in for James O'Brien here on LBC. I wonder what you make of these population figures. Did you hear that in the news? 9.7 million more people in the UK, which sounds like a lot. But then again, over the next 25 years, we'll plumb the depths of those figures, which affect us all, really, during the show. Nigel Farage has taken off his political hat at one stage during his phone-in here on LBC to agree with the head of the Met that we need more stop and search. He told Mr Ferrari this morning that LBC listeners will agree with him. Is that the case? Would you agree with Farage, with Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe too, that we need more stop and search? Talk about that after 11. First, though, I want to just reflect upon the comments of the head of MI5, because this is a man who's been in the intelligence and security game for 3 decades. So when he says that the threat is at a scale he's never seen before, I think that should make people sit up a bit. So 2 stories I want to bring together here, arguably representing both ends of the freedom and security debate. At one end, perhaps the pragmatic, the working in the shadows end, making the tough decisions end, the head of MI5 saying 6 attacks foiled at home and several overseas. He spoke of a 3-dimensional threat at home, overseas, and also online. He said the speed at which radicalisation can occur online and the emphasis on low sophistication but potentially deadly plots are 2 major challenges posed by ISIL, while a greater ambition for, quotes, mass casualty attacks has been observed in the last year, which is pretty sobering. Meanwhile, top of the Independent website this morning, a journalist who works in the area of terrorism, who has developed contact with jihadis overseas, has his computer seized under the Terrorism Act. Officers obtained an order from a judge that was served on the BBC and Secunda Kamani, their journalist. For what reason? Well, presumably to see who he's been talking to, people who he's interviewed previously who have said that they want to commit terror acts on our streets. This is a statement from the BBC. They say police obtained an order under the Terrorism Act requiring them to hand over communication between a journalist and a man in Syria who had publicly identified himself as an IS member. The man had featured in Newsnight reports and was not a confidential source. Well, if he's not confidential, why do police need the laptop? 0345 6060 973. Given what the head of MI5 said last night, are you comfortable with police seizing a laptop to potentially plunder confidential or otherwise sources of a journalist? Because there is an argument which says, well, if the journalist can get access to these people, why can't MI5? Are you prepared to see certain civil liberties, and they always attach the verb curbed to this, are you prepared to see certain civil liberties curbed as a result of the increasing terror threat that we are hearing about from our security services? Or, knowing what, in part, the security services might be getting up to with certain amounts of our information and data and access to them, are you a little worried about the fact that journalists, in this case sources, are being taken away from them forcibly by terror laws, which are very, very easy to enforce now? 0345, or at least easier, 6060 973. What is the balance to be struck between dealing with the ever-increasing threat at a scale we're told we have not seen before, and our right to have confidential sources, both as journalists and our right as members of the public to speak to people that we'd like to keep private? If there's been wrongdoing, absolutely. But there doesn't look to have been. Wonder what you think. 0345 6060 973. 8 minutes past 10 the time. Let's speak to Olivia Guetta, a consultant in security and counter-terrorism. Morning to you.
Good morning, Tom.
Let's first talk about the scale of the threat that the head of MI5 is talking about today. Would you agree with what he says, that we are seeing an increase in potential terror activity?
Look, it's very surprising. I was on the air on LBC about a year ago.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you. Where I made the case that the threat to the UK and the West had been literally multiplied by 10 by the advance of Islamic State calling for its followers in the West to attack the homeland. We have never seen the sheer numbers of potential terrorists on our shores. Yesterday, MI5 spoke about 3,000 potential terrorists in the UK, to give a little drawback on what it means. It means that if we were to surveil and monitor those people, we would need 90,000 police officers and security services to do that, which is impossible.
Yeah.
So our security services have to make a choice on hunches, on information to follow this guy or the other guy. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because we're talking about the ones that are on their radar. But as of now, we haven't had a lone wolf attack, i.e. a guy that is not on the radar, we don't know, is getting radicalized on his computer at home, is not told his parents or his friends or his girlfriend that he's going to act, and that's what is really the nightmarish scenario that we have on our hands.
And the reason you put it in those terms is because, of course, the other lone wolf-ish attack that we have seen on UK shores, of course, the incident in Woolwich, those two people were on the radar of British security services, but not at a level at which that meant that they were being surveilled properly.
Exactly. Same thing happened in France. Same thing happened in Copenhagen. Same thing happened in Australia. They were all on the radar. And in the case of France, the Kouachi brothers behind the Charlie Hebdo attacks were surveilled for 3 years before it was dropped, because it was deemed that they were not representing a threat. And that's what we have to deal with, is, get the information, but also get the manpower to do that.
So, and you mentioned they're getting the information. Let's say that the police believe that certain amounts of information is stored on, say, the laptop of a journalist who has previously done work in the arena relating to British jihadis going abroad and fighting for ISIL. What curbs on his freedom to pursue his sources and keep those sources anonymous should he have, therefore, when we are looking at a threat of, as you put it, 3,000 potential terrorists in the UK?
Look, a couple of things. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think this case is really the most extreme that we're seeing. The problem that security services have, and they've complained about that time and time again, is mostly Twitter and Google and Facebook not cooperating at all. And we're talking about propaganda, which is something that I'm much more worried than anything else, and getting the source from a journalist. And I think they're reverting to that because they're not getting the help from technology companies, mostly in the U.S., that think that liberty at all costs is what needs to be done. And that's where I think the issue is really at hand, is if somebody is pushing people to commit terrorism and killing people, should he be allowed to spread his venom on Twitter?
And of course, in the case of the journalist who has had his laptop taken, the BBC have been at pains to point out that if there were any sort of incriminating evidence, that they of course cooperate with the police in those circumstances. But this does seem to be a case where this is a guy working on stories, talking to people that are already outed in the public as would-be jihadis, and he is working on that behind the scenes, but not necessarily in a necessarily confidential way. Therefore, it would seem odd that the police would use terror legislation to take the laptop off him.
Look, at this point, I'm not familiar enough to exactly know what the case is behind the journalist allegations. But what I can say is that the pressure is such on security services that they have to get it quickly, and they have to follow each track, because if something, God forbid, happens in London or Birmingham, people are going to blame them quickly, which has been the case in the past. Security services are the first to be blamed, whereas they do an outstanding job, and they should be really looked after like the cream of the crop that we should have.
Absolutely, a point well made. Olivia, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Olivia Guetta, consultant in security and counter-terrorism. Interesting point that he made on the wider issue there of the the threat that we are facing versus the level of protection we have currently to deal with that threat. As he said, 3,000 potential terrorists in the UK, meaning thousands more officers needed in order to follow those people, which just isn't possible. And when you have, as the head of MI5 has said, a three-dimensional threat, online being part of that three-dimensional threat, when websites don't seem to comply in handing over potential communications between two people that the security services should be watching, the police have no option, do they? If they're looking to keep us safe, the security services have no option but to take details through force, effectively, through the law, effectively. So this journalist having his laptop removed, well, do you think that's okay? Do you think that's all in the name of keeping us safe? Do you feel happy about that? Comfortable with that? 0345 6060 973. Let's sneak in John. John's in Suffolk. Hello, sir.
Hi.
Your feelings on this?
It's an interesting debate, isn't it? I mean, the level of rhetoric and fear that's being generated. Let's put this in the context of what's been happening. I mean, we know through Edward Snowden, thankfully, what the NSA, GCHQ have been doing on collecting and harvesting mass data across the piece. I mean, if they want to demonstrate or generate more fear, why not seize a journalist's laptop? You know, this person.
So this is playing into their hands.
They have all the information there, so why not?
So this is playing into precisely what the terrorists want, is it, that we are...
This is about playing into their own agenda, about making, basically trying to control what people can and can't do.
So you don't believe, one, that the threat is as high as the head of MI5 says it is, no?
I didn't say that. I think that...
So what narrative is it that they are trying to pursue that means that they do say it?
The actions and policies that, we follow. We all, condone certain wars. We all went into them. So we're complicit in some of that. But in effect, if people want to target us, it's a function of their right and will to do that.
Okay.
I mean, if we're collecting all the data we need, why should we target a journalist's laptop? For well-known communication, why should we do that?
John, thank you. 0345 6060 973. Why do we need to take a journalist's sources when they say, the BBC, that those sources are not confidential? The guy he's speaking to has already outed himself as a would-be jihadi. Why do MI5 need to steal the laptop? 0345 6060 973. Steal would perhaps be the wrong verb there. They did use correct laws in order to do it. Love to get your thoughts on this. Do give us a ring. I'm Tom Swarbrick. This is LBC. The time, 10:17.
From the LBC Travel Centre, I'm Chris Gold.